Hello to all the real progressives out there. I apologize for the earlier audio issues. I am hoping it is better. Please let me know in the chat if it is not. We had some echoing going on earlier. I'm hoping it is fixed. We have a great show for you today under the assumption that it is fixed. We're going to talk about the expanding wealth gap. We've passed quite a milestone there with the 1% now owning more than the middle class. So far, so good. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. We're also going to talk about the recent seeming workers' revolt in terms of lots of strikes going on and massive amounts of workers quitting recently from their jobs. It's I think a positive sign in terms of worker organizing and labor organizing and working towards a more just workplace environment. We're going to talk about Merck price gouging on their big pharma. They're price gouging on a COVID therapeutic that they have produced that was provided. They took a bunch of public funding for research and development of this COVID therapeutic, and now they're price gouging the U.S. government for it to buy it back. We're going to cover a cringy video of Kamala Harris using child actors to try to repair her reputation, which has taken quite a hit since she became vice president, although really it wasn't exactly stellar to start with. We're going to talk about Manchin's opposition to the key provisions for combating climate change in the reconciliation bill. We're going to talk a little bit about the debt ceiling. We're going to talk about the Walton family attempting to privatize water in Colorado. We're going to talk about Rahm Emanuel's corruption and propaganda. We got all sorts of great stories for you guys today. And again, apologize for those earlier audio issues. Want to start with those Real Progressive plugs. Go to realprogressives.org if you want to learn more about us. Our Patreon's there if you'd like to contribute. Great articles, podcasts, all of our content, MMT, educational stuff. Whatever you need is there. Go to realprogressives.org and make sure you're not missing out on any of our content. We're going to start with this wealth gap story. So, apologize. I didn't share my screen here and all of the hassle about the audio. Here we go. So this is in Truth Out. Top 1% in U.S. now have more wealth than entire middle class combined. New data from the Federal Reserve shows that the top 1% of wealthy individuals in the U.S. now have more wealth than the entire middle class combined. As of this summer, the middle 60% of American earners, which economists typically categorize as the middle class, now own only 26.6% of the national wealth, Bloomberg reported. Meanwhile, the top 1% control 27% of the nation's collective wealth. This is the first time the richest Americans have had more wealth than the middle class since the Fed began recording such data in 1989. The past decades have seen growing accumulation of wealth for the richest Americans, coupled with steadily declining wealth for the middle class. In 1989, the top 1% controlled 17.2% of the nation's wealth, whereas the middle 60% controlled 36.4%. So look at that change in just the last 30-ish years. This is not really surprising to people who have paid close attention to this stuff or followed politics in this country during the neoliberal era. This is the tendency that you see from neoliberal economic policy, and the kind of revolving door corruption that we allow, the kind of fraud that we allow Wall Street and big banks to commit, and all this kind of stuff. It all just kind of accumulates to this recipe for a massive wealth gap where those who already enjoy the status quo get to further enjoy the status quo. But this kind of lays the groundwork for the big story lately, which is that worker revolt situation. In August, we had 3% of workers quit their job. That's like unprecedented. That's absolutely massive. It's huge. And I think there's a lot of factors there, but I think that among them is people through this COVID situation have kind of rethought what they want to do with their life. And you don't necessarily want to slave away in the service industry or the retail industry or whatever for minimum wage. And people, I think, have just kind of had this realization that life is short. I think a lot of people lost loved ones to COVID, or were scared they were going to die or lose a loved one to COVID. And I think that makes people rethink their priorities. And I'm glad to see workers standing up and saying we deserve better. That's needed to happen for a very long time. And if that's some silver lining coming out of this disastrous pandemic, then at least there's that silver lining, right? And I think the other element here is that because there is genuinely a tight labor market right now, that leaves some people in their work environment like overworked. You're having to work more hours or do more work during your hours, and that leads to less satisfaction at the workplace as well, which contributes to workers being more willing to push back, right? There's also less of a fear in a tight labor market that someone is just going to come in and easily take your job, that you're so easily replaceable, right? So there's a lot of different factors that I think kind of are contributing to this, but I think it's overwhelmingly positive. We've covered a lot of strike stuff here. We're going to show another clip from More Perfect Union. I really can't recommend them highly enough. They cover all sorts of labor organizing issues, strikes, protests, etc. And you know, they've had coverage from all over the country. You guys, we could, like, just to name a few random ones, there was the window washer strike in Minneapolis that we covered. Healthcare nurses struck in Massachusetts. There's currently healthcare workers striking in Buffalo. Coal workers striking, right? We're going to talk about the Kellogg strike here later today, and the John Deere strike later today, and you know, just all sorts of, it's really great to see. Also Kaiser, I believe it's Kaiser, the medical group, they're looking at potentially having a major strike as well in California, Oregon, and Hawaii. It's all over, you guys. It's great to see. It's really great to see. So to kind of dive into this, as I floated there, we're going to watch this More Perfect Union video that details some strikers. Give me just a second to find it. I apologize. Here we go. This is about the situation with Kellogg.
Feed all these families, but I can't feed mine.
You know, best friend died. Sorry, not my problem. That's yours. We got cereal to make.
We work 7 days a week. We are literally scheduled 7 days a week.
For any time that someone would feel sick or whatever, they want you to use your vacation days as opposed to having sick days. And again, in working excess of 120 days in a row.
$400 million in profit on cereal alone is not something you can walk in and tell us we're going to give you less for.
If you don't be here, you get a point. If you get a point, you can get suspended. You know what I mean? So we got no choice. So you have to be here. But it's just killing us.
You know, you can't even now go in there and tell them that your aunt passed away and you need a day off. They'll tell you to call in or use a vacation day.
So in order for me to get a day off, someone else is working 16 hours. Very often, we don't even know that we have to work 16 hours until 10 minutes before it's time to go home. If you have dogs, if you have kids you have to pick up from school, if you have other obligations, I hope you have somebody to call because you have to stay. They could tell me at 10:45, Heather, you're forced over, you have to stay. So then I'll work that next shift. At 6:30 a.m., I can go home. But then my regularly scheduled shift starts at 2:30 the next day. So there's 8 hours off in between, and that's that, according to them, is plenty.
They want to take our cost of living away. They want to take our vacations. They want to take our holiday pay away.
They want to take away any kind of ability for new people to come in to have what we have.
We're done, you know, just giving up concession by concession. We're done being bullied by a company that makes millions and millions and, you know, gives out billions of dollars in dividends.
That direct path to full-time employment, these transitionals never saw it.
Being a transitional, we pay for our health care. Our wages are different. We don't get a pension like everybody else does.
There is no difference between the guy that works right next to me tomorrow or 10 years from now. There's no reason why that guy should have a lower benefit level, a lower retirement level than what I do.
That's why we are striking, because we want the better pay, pension for everybody. It's not for only one group.
I have this job because people like my dad that worked here before me for 34 years didn't give up stuff coming in. We're just kind of looked over, your number.
We hear every day, and then today they're trying to tell us we make too much money.
They want to complain about what our wage is, and they want to talk about what our wage is. Well, if you didn't make me work every single Saturday and Sunday, if you didn't make me work every single holiday, my annual income wouldn't be at these levels that you don't want to go spread around like it's a bad thing.
The contract, it doesn't lend itself to future generations of sustainability here. I'm second generation, my father worked here, I'm not the only one. It's kind of a way of life, and we don't want to rob that from the next generation.
We've been asked about how long we're willing to fight, and at the end of the day, it's going to be one day longer than they are.
So one of the things that's always kind of just astounding to me with these situations, and perhaps it shouldn't be, but like it's in many ways to be expected. But it's astounding to me how in so many cases the workers are like committed to the company, and they really like seem like the kind of workers that any boss would want. Like he says right there, this has been like a tradition in the family. This is a way of our way of life. We want to keep working here. So it's the workers are being like so beyond reasonable about this. You know what I mean? And at every single turn, the big business always still shafts them. Despite that, that's exactly what you want, is someone that takes ownership over the workplace, someone who views it as part of their life and generational and whatever, right? And yet, how does Kellogg treat them? It's insane. It just defies even logic. They will be rapacious to the point of even shooting themselves in the foot in a longer term sense, right? It's all about next quarter's profits when you talk about American corporations. And that's what Kellogg rather has displayed here. So do not cross the picket line. Cross Kellogg off of your grocery list, and support these workers as they fight for some dignity in their workplace and better compensation and the ability to actually live a dignified life, have the time to do so outside of the workplace, have some decision making over their own schedules, etc. Right. I have another tweet here to show you guys from More Perfect Union, actually, and it's a statement from somebody who was at a one of Starbucks propaganda meetings that was anti-union, right? So More Perfect Union here tweeting out, a Starbucks union busting meeting made this worker decide to join the union. I may not have been a pro-union member back then, but corporates false anti-union propaganda is really making me hope we succeed with the union. Today was the last straw. I'm going to read you guys this whole statement. Buffalo partner who just left an anti-union meeting. I'm typing this in my car after leaving an anti-union meeting. This time they had us meet in smaller groups throughout the day. My perspective on this whole issue is, as I'm fairly recent to Starbucks, is that I did not think a union was necessary because of the obvious benefits. I think my perspective changed for the better because, oh my God, that 1 hour in this conference room was nothing but anti-union propaganda, and they're not even trying to hide it. Wallahi, the bias is very clear. All right, so you're corporate and you don't want a union, understandable, but that's not what they were saying in the meetings. They literally just pointed out every single con of unions, mostly utter fucking BS, and I knew the moment when they pulled a data sheet from 6 years ago from the Nations United Union, where union members had to supposedly pay $600 a year after taxes. Basically, their idea was that, are you really going to sell your soul to a union and lose your rights as a human being? Like what? And then the response that they have here is how they kind of responded to all of this. I was speaking to another partner from our store who was a committee member about the entire thing. It makes me sick. I may not have been a pro-union member back then, but corporate's false anti-union propaganda is really making me hope we succeed with the union. Today was the last straw. That is incredibly encouraging, you guys. That is so incredibly encouraging. It means that there eventually is a line where the attempts to avoid a union will actually backfire. And that is incredibly encouraging and great to see. And I hope that will continue and become a trend. Because as we've talked about with like the Amazon situation, not just in Bessemer, but across the country, the lengths that these corporations will go to squash a union is absolutely ridiculous. I mean, it's mind-boggling. It's insane. The one that I always like to bring up, just because it feels so, manipulative and so like out of a movie or something, is when Amazon, went to basically lobby to have the city change the traffic lights and the patterns of traffic lights so that drivers wouldn't be sitting next to strikers and picketers. Like, the lengths they will go to is absolutely, utterly insane. And it's good to see it backfiring. And I hope that Starbucks unionizes, just like I hope Amazon unionizes. Support a local union in your area. Support labor organizers in your area. Go follow More Perfect Union. This is an incredibly just cause, and it's great to see some revolt, in a sense, from workers across the country in all sorts of different fields. It's just seriously like heartwarming to see. I'm usually covering such negative stories up here, and this is a very important story that is very positive. I also think this is building energy towards like a true general strike, or something close enough to a general strike that it may have an effect. I'm not necessarily suggesting that we're there right now. I know that the conditions need to be right, but I think this kind of trajectory may land us in a more useful position to really fight for those workers, and to change our society for the better, to have the leverage to put our foot down on certain key issues, right? So heartwarming stuff there. Also wanted to show you guys, I'm sure you've kind of been following the John Deere situation, where there's a lot of workers striking. John Deere tried to replace some of their unionized workers, and let's just say it did not go very well. This is Ken Klippenstein, who's a fantastic follow on Twitter. He says, John Deere is trying to break a strike by having salaried office workers operate heavy machinery. Let's see how that's going. First one is here is from Jonah Furman, who is also a great reporter on these issues. Go follow Jonah. On the first full day of John Deere using non-union workers to attempt to replace UAW members on the factory floor, didn't even make it till 8 a.m. without a 911 call. And I love how they get the picture with the UAW sign at the bottom there. Isn't that fantastic? Jonah here again. Day one, a non-union salaried worker just crashed a tractor inside the plant. Whoops. Day one, 2 incidents when they tried to replace their union workers. So again, the company here trying to take the easy way out and paying the price. And, you got to kind of laugh and love to see it, right? I do obviously hope that whoever hurt themselves is okay, but it's, in terms of John Deere's conduct here, it's relatively hilarious. And yeah, again, Ken Klippenstein, really great follow on Twitter. He's always pointing out these kinds of hypocrisies and in that kind of quick and snappy way. But, this is just really genuinely heartwarming. And I also want to point out the IATSE pending strike. I don't recall if it actually got to a strike, but they struck a deal. So that's basically like the cast and crew members in Hollywood ended up striking a deal that appears to have gotten some of the things that they were asking for. So we do also have like documented successful labor organizing. It's not just, the successful union squashing of Amazon and all of these negative stories. We do have plenty of examples throughout history of this stuff working, and it's great to see it occurring across the country. And I also want to point out, you guys, the more unanimous that it is, in other words, the more companies and the more industries that end up in these battles, the more leverage each of them individually have. It's a little bit like how a union actually helps its entire area, the industry as a whole, get better wages. If you think about it this way, say you have a grocery store that's unionized and a grocery store that's not in the same town, okay? The unionized store is going to end up treating its workers better, more than likely. And if the other stores in the area that might not be unionized don't match that treatment and that compensation package, whatever it might be, benefits, time off, pay, whatever, workplace environment, if they don't match, or at least, somewhat match that, then they're going to bleed workers, and people are going to go to the store that treats them better. So unions actually uplift everybody in the area. It kind of has this ripple effect, right? And in the same way, if you have all of these strikes happening and protests and labor organizing and all of this kind of stuff, it all builds on itself, right? It all kind of like it creates leverage for the movement as a whole. And it's just really, really great to see that. I hope that we continue to see movement going in that direction. But we're going to take a look now at Merck, their price gouging on COVID therapeutics. This is in the Intercept. It's from Sharon Lerner. Merck sells federally financed COVID pill to U.S. for 40 times what it costs to make. The COVID-19 treatment, molnupiravir, was developed using funding from the National Institutes of Health and the Department of Defense. A 5-day course of that drug, the new medicine being hailed as a huge advance in the treatment of COVID-19, costs $17.74 to produce, according to a report issued last week by drug pricing experts at the Harvard School of Public Health and King's College Hospital in London. Merck is charging the U.S. government $712 for the same amount of medicine, or 40 times the price. Last Friday's announcement that the new medicine cut the risk of hospitalization among clinical trial participants with moderate or mild illness in half could have huge implications for the course of the coronavirus pandemic. Because it's a pill as opposed to monoclonal antibodies, a comparable antiviral treatment that is administered intravenously, whatever that drug is expected to be more widely used and hopefully will cut the death rate. In the first 29 days of the trial, no deaths were reported among the 585 patients who received the drug, while 8 of the people who received a placebo died, according to the statement put out by Merck and Ridgeback Biotherapeutics, the two companies that are jointly launching it. So the thing is here that this drug was developed using public money to finance the research and development. Now they're turning around and charging the US government, which provided that public funding, 40 times the cost of production for the drug. And this is obviously a drug, you guys, that serves the public good, right? We want to attack COVID in as many ways as possible. I encourage people to get vaccinated if you haven't. We want to practice good, the social distancing and masking in situations where it's appropriate, this kind of thing. We also want to have good therapeutics when people end up in the hospital, right? Anything that's going to cut down on the death rate, cut down on the rate of major illness is a good thing. And can take some of the strain off of the healthcare system and healthcare workers, etc. So that they're price gouging on this is, one of these instances of very predictable behavior, but quite egregious in this case. And even on an issue such as COVID that has so grasped the public attention for obvious reasons over the last couple of years, this isn't like, a lot of times when they're price gouging, it's on something that's behind the scenes enough that it doesn't draw a whole lot of attention. This is COVID, you guys. It's a COVID therapeutic. It's insane that this has flown under the radar in the manner that it has. And this is, I do want to note, this is one of the very strong reasons, one of the most prevalent reasons, I should say, that there is such vaccine hesitancy in this country is because Big Pharma behaves this way. Of course, they price gouge, they're rapacious, they're greedy. And why would someone trust them? And then when they go do this, they just kind of verify that account of their behavior and again, lessen trust in the vaccines and in other therapeutics and treatments. I do want to point out, though, to the anti-vax crowd that will drift to some other treatment, whether it's the ivermectin shit or whether it's these monoclonal antibodies, which are incredibly expensive, but apparently very effective at treating COVID. If you're willing to drift over to the monoclonal antibodies, it's like a couple grand per dose for those. It's insanely expensive. And who do you think makes those? If you're anti-vax because you don't want to give Pfizer and Moderna your money, who do you think makes the monoclonal antibodies? Who do you think makes ivermectin? Who do you think makes any of these other therapeutics or treatments for COVID? It's Big Pharma. If you're going to drift to the monoclonal antibodies, you're just giving more of your money to these companies than if you would get the vaccine. Okay, vaccine is free now; it's publicly paid for, but it's significantly cheaper in terms of production costs than the monoclonal antibodies. So again, if you want to oppose the vaccines, just understand that whatever treatment you're deferring to instead is also Big Pharma. So while I very much understand the institutional distrust that leads to some of this hesitancy, the sort of response that we see from people who still are hesitant about the vaccine is in many ways just entirely irrational. They're violating their own principle to try to grasp to this. I'm not going to go get the vaccine, right? So it's sad to see Big Pharma continuing to engage in this behavior, which contributes to that institutional distrust. It's also just flat out sad, in a vacuum, to see Big Pharma continuing to price gouge for medications that people desperately need or that would improve their lives or make them less sick. That's all just egregious conduct, I think, in any ethical person or reasonable person's book. And it's a real shame that we allow it to happen so consistently and on such important drugs. Like the one that you see a lot of is insulin, right? There are a lot of diabetics that really desperately rely on insulin, and yet we gouge the shit out of it. I mean, or epinephrine is another one, with Joe Manchin's daughter famously price gouging on epinephrine, which people with allergies rely on to survive if they have an allergic reaction. I mean, this kind of behavior is capitalism at its, core. We will choose profit and greed over your life, over your well-being, over your quality of life. And it's a real shame to see it continuing to occur here, even with COVID garnering obviously as much attention as it has. So shame on Merck and shame on Big Pharma in general for engaging in this kind of rapacious behavior and continuing to contribute to a distrust that then also has a negative effect on our ability to combat this virus. It's like in every way possible, they're making it worse. And of course, they get to benefit from making it worse, because if we don't pull out of this, and it's obviously an endemic at this point, they get to continue making the treatments and continue making the boosters and all this stuff, right? So I'm obviously not anti-vax. You guys, anyone who's a regular viewer will know that I got 2 shots of the Pfizer back in April, and I recommend that everybody get vaccinated. It's just a real shame that Big Pharma conducts themselves in a way that contributes to a lot of that distrust, right? So I do want to get here to I don't really want to say fun, because it's not fun. It's actually really, really sad. But this is a video of Kamala Harris trying to repair her reputation. And actually, before I show it, I'm going to give a little bit of context. Kamala's reputation, her approval ratings, her favorability ratings have absolutely hit the floor. Now, Biden's have also fallen off a cliff lately, but not quite to the degree that Kamala's have. And hers weren't great to start with. As many of you, I'm sure, are well aware, she had to drop out of the primaries quite early. It was before Iowa even hit. So she clearly was not popular among her own voter base. And she has continued to go downhill from there. So even Democrats are starting to recognize this, whether they themselves like Kamala or not. They're starting to recognize that she's a problem for the party. And I just find it overwhelmingly hilarious, because the media and the Democratic establishment so forced her down our throat. It was not a logical pick in any way, shape, or form for VP, you guys. She's from California, which the Democrats were going to win anyway. Sometimes you pick a VP from a swing state to try to win a key state, right? She's from California, okay? She's not popular, and the Democrats know that, because they just ran her in that primary. She was from a state that once she won that Senate seat, she wasn't going to lose it, because California is so deep blue. So there was all of the evidence suggested that she's not a good politician. And I mean that objectively. Like, the more she's in the public, the less people like her, kind of a thing. It's not just my subjective opinion, which I obviously think she's an awful politician. She feels about as fake as anybody. Every line feels like it was calculated and recited, and it feels like it's trying to play to an audience. It just feels so fabricated. And but that's just me. I'm speaking objectively here. Like, the more she's in the public spotlight, the less people think of her. That's the definition of a bad politician. And the Democrats are starting to recognize this. So it's very clear that she has hired consultants and brought people onto her staff who do, like, PR and crisis management and reputation repair and all this shit. So this is a clear effort to put her in the public spotlight in a way that is cute and relatable and all this whatever. It's just cringy beyond cringy, you guys. I haven't seen this level of fakeness and cliche and platitude ridden nonsense, fatuous nonsense, since Hillary Clinton ran for president. That's the last time I saw this degree of this sort of I don't know, just fake everything. So we'll watch this clip. This is only a couple minutes. I know it's like torture to watch this shit, but this is Kamala sitting down with what turned out to be child actors to talk about space exploration and her advice to them. And you guys, seriously, like, if you can find me a more hollow clip where someone says more words without saying a damn thing, I would be stunned. This is just remarkable in the worst kind of way.
Welcome, you guys.
Thank you so much.
Welcome. Ready to start? Okay, go.
So, I may not always be fast to take my parents' advice, but what is the best advice your parents have given you that perhaps you can share with us today?
You know, one of the most important pieces of advice that I can offer you guys, and I want you to really remember this, Never let anybody tell you who you are. You tell them who you are. Never let anybody suggest to you that you are what they think you should be. You tell them who you are and who you know you are and what you intend to be. Got that?
Yes.
All right. I got more advice. You just let me know.
So what is the most surprising thing you found about being vice president?
There have been a lot of things because I've never been vice president before. So there are many new things. But I'll tell you one of the things that I'm really excited about, and one of the reasons for our visit and the time we're going to spend time together today is the Space Council. My mom was a scientist, so she would take us to the lab with her, like on the weekends and after school, because she had to work long hours. And I just love the idea of exploring the unknown. And then there's other things that we just haven't figured out or discovered yet. To think about so much that's out there that we still have to learn. Like, I love that. I love that. And so I'm very excited about the Space Council. We're going to learn so much as we increasingly, I think, are curious and interested in the potential for the discoveries and the work we can do in space. So that's one of the things I'm most excited about. But the other, you guys are gonna see, you're gonna literally see the craters on the moon with your own eyes.
Oh my goodness.
With your own eyes, I'm telling you, it is gonna be unbelievable. So that's one of the things we can do here too, which makes it so exciting. So that's what we're gonna do. You guys ready to go over there?
Yes, ma'am.
Come on, let's go.
I mean, honestly, if that doesn't just make your stomach lurch, your bullshit detector needs some repair. How fake can you possibly be? And of course, then after this video is put out, it comes out that these were all child actors that YouTube had selected for this video. And their response was that they're proud of the video. So it was just so, you know, all this stuff is staged, but that's like next level staged. Like, you couldn't go find 5 kids that happened to be interested in space to do this video. You had to go find child actors to make it as fake as all could be. It's nothing against the kids, obviously, you guys. They're kids. They're and it's also nothing against the topic. I'm very much in favor of exploring space. I'd rather be public than fucking Jeff Bezos, and Elon Musk. But no, I'm all for exploring space if it's for the public good. I think that should be prioritized, and I would love to see any given prominent politician talk about that. But this was just so it just, you physically cringe watching that kind of shit. It reminds me of Hillary's like, I like hot sauce, or Pokemon go to the polls. It makes you want to take a shower after you watch something like that. It's just so beyond fake. But the reason I wanted to cover it, it's obviously not substantive, is it is just an indication of how concerned the Democrats and Kamala are about her reputation and how she's viewed by the public. And again, it's like, to anyone who was paying attention during the primary, this is obvious and this is not surprising at all. And this is what would have been predicted. But I think that the Democrats are so in a bubble that they genuinely thought that she was going to be liked. And I also have to say, it's pretty obvious that she was used as a token. And I find that kind of offensive in and of itself. There were plenty of qualified. You want a black woman? Go get Nina Turner. So there's certainly I think they thought that they needed to pick a woman of color for VP, and that, led them in part to Kamala. But she's just, there are so many better candidates than that to me, that makes it insulting. It as though all women of color are as fake as Kamala. That it's a little bit insulting. You know what I mean? And she's just not lived up to whatever degree of hope they had for her in terms of her reputation and helping the reputation or view of the Biden administration. Go look at any poll. And, again, not at all surprising to anybody paying slightest modicum of attention, but the Democratic Party clearly is more intent on, sort of forcing their views into reality than paying any attention to what the voters actually want. And this Kamala fit the bill. She's not progressive. It was laughable to see during the primary that she was like touted as a progressive. I remember that study going around that tried to claim she was the most progressive senator since she took office in the Senate. I mean, it's laughable. It's utterly laughable. And it's pretty clear that she has towed that centrist line, that incrementalist line, that the do nothing approach and hide behind Manchin and Sinema approach, that the Biden administration as a whole have embraced. So anyway, just wanted to show you guys that cringe video and talk about what it means in the bigger picture in terms of Democrats starting to realize, oh shit, we're probably in trouble in the midterms and in 2024. And I think that is the case, by the way. I think they're going to lose the House. I think they're going to more than likely lose the Senate. And I think they're going to have a hell of a time holding on to the White House in 2024. So we'll, and this is part of the argument with the reconciliation bill, by the way, you guys, which we're about to dive into a little bit here, that part of why it's so important to get something is that it's overwhelmingly likely that they're going to lose. So the progressives don't have any leverage in a Republican House or a Republican Senate. And despite our on the left disappointment in their lack of use of that leverage, they do have it currently. So we need to fight like hell to get whatever we can in terms of addressing the climate and creating jobs and some of the better provisions that exist in that reconciliation bill about like expanding healthcare, expanding education, and access to tuition-free community college effectively, things like that. Universal pre-K. These are all good provisions, you guys, and we really should fight like hell for them because it's overwhelmingly likely that we're going to have absolutely no chance of passing them for years. Anyhow, so to dive into this, I said reconciliation. Joe Manchin will not support key climate provisions. So I want to show you guys here an article in Vox titled exactly that. Joe Manchin won't support a key climate program. Alternatives won't be enough. The clean electricity program is the backbone of the energy transition, experts say. Key climate policy designed to phase out fossil fuels will likely be cut from Democrats' upcoming reconciliation package due to opposition from Senator Joe Manchin, who has reportedly refused to back the measure as negotiations over the budget bill continue. According to the New York Times, Coral Davenport, who first reported, the news on Friday, Manchin, who chairs the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee, will not support the sweeping clean electricity program that is widely seen as the centerpiece of the bill's climate plan. The $150 billion program, officially known as the Clean Electricity Performance Program, or CEPP, would reward energy suppliers who switch from fossil fuels like coal and natural gas to sustainable power sources like solar, wind, and nuclear power, which are already in use by about 40% of the industry, and fine those who do not. Experts believe the program is the most effective way to slash U.S. carbon emissions significantly enough to prevent the global temperature from rising by 1.5 degrees Celsius, a threshold which would have drastic consequences for the planet if exceeded. So Manchin here doing what Joe Manchin does. Right? We know where Manchin's money comes from. West Virginia is a state where he can get away with this because it is a conservative state, and it's really unfortunate to see him doing what he can to hold this stuff up. Also, obviously, Kyrsten Sinema, whose corruption has been very well documented in her conduct as of late, running off to have dinner with her pack at some fancy hotel, and claiming she was going to a doctor's appointment instead of staying in D.C. to work and negotiate on this bill. So we have a couple of Democrats, and really there are a lot more of them, you guys, that are just perfectly happy to hide behind Manchin and Sinema. They're perfectly happy to not be the loud voice. They can go back to their constituents and say, well, I tried. I really did want the reconciliation bill, but we got a couple of members that, so they can go back to their constituents and play both sides. They don't actually have to pass the bill, which they probably really don't want to pass, at least large portions of it. And then they can go back to their constituents and say, well, I really wanted to pass the bill, right? So it's cover for all of the rest of the Democrats, many of whom are quite conservative. And I think it is doom in terms of Biden, because if he really wants to get reelected, what's happening right now with his reputation and his approval is, I think, a trend that's going to continue. And when you do virtually nothing after you're elected president and given both chambers of Congress, it's pretty natural for the voters to get turned off and decide they're not going to turn out for you again, right? It's not a far-fetched thing that you might see a lot of voters stay home if Biden decides that what he's done is enough. And obviously, even this reconciliation bill is not anywhere close to enough. So on the left, we're just perpetually told no about the vast majority of things that we want. But I do hope that we at least get some of these provisions. Of course, the climate one is what do other issues matter if we're not going to address the climate, you guys? If we're not going to have a habitable planet, then what's the point of any other policy? So it should be treated with the utmost urgency, and it's really sad to see it falling by the wayside and continuing to, trend towards such disastrous results like in our lifetime. It's already happening. All these massive floods, the extreme weather that we're seeing. We're going to see sea levels rise. This is a product of climate change, and portions of the globe are drifting towards uninhabitable. We're going to start to see the effects of this quite quickly. And despite that, Joe Manchin still siding with Republicans on this issue and deciding to oppose key climate programs. I want to talk briefly about Chris Cuomo and the allegations against Chris Cuomo. A woman named Shelley Ross accused him, she was his boss, by the way, accused him of grabbing her ass in front of her husband. So Chris Cuomo, quite bold in his sexual assault and harassment of his boss. And then he wrote her an email apologizing. But what was really interesting to me about the email, and I wish I would have queued this up for you guys, he apologized first to the husband. Like, he said, I bet I wouldn't want to see someone grabbing my wife's ass in front of me either. So his first instinct was, boy, that must have sucked for him. Not, hey, I'm sorry I assaulted you. Okay, so even his apology was something else. He said that he was just excited to see her or something, enthusiastic to see her. And that was his response, and that he crossed the line and blah, 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 right? So he sends this email like that night or the next day or something. And she has now come out. This was a while ago. She has now come out and expressed that this happened. She's made this public. And she says the reason she's doing that is because of his gross hypocrisy on the issue. Chris Cuomo takes that desk at CNN and sits there and projects himself as some sort of, proud feminist, and talks as though he's a staunch supporter of Me Too. Now, of course, we know there are multiple hypocrisies here because he was caught behind the scenes advising his brother, who was also accused of sexual assault by numerous women and harassment by numerous women, advised him basically to sweep it under the rug and not to apologize. And helped him write an evasive statement, to say the least, a deflectionary, evasive statement. So Cuomo playing both sides of this issue, obviously, and then he's now accused of assaulting his boss. And now the other element of this is, Shelley went on Megyn Kelly's show and discussed how Brian Stelter has not responded to this. Now, why does Brian Stelter in particular matter? Because he is supposedly the chief media critic over at CNN, and part of his job is to do the uncomfortable part when a CNN character or personality gets caught up in something. It is kind of under his umbrella to cover it, right? It's not just about smashing Fox News and killing other media outlets and Breitbart and whatever. So of course Stelter has been entirely silent on this. Of course Cuomo has entirely refused to address it, even though his apology, the email he sent, was made public. He has still refused to address it at all, and CNN has done nothing either. So Chris Cuomo just gets to get away with this because he's Chris Cuomo. And it's thick with irony. I mean, it's just so rich. The whole situation with his brother, his contribution to his brother's handling of the situation, and now this, and all of it kind of with the bow on top of him trying to portray himself as some sort of feminist on TV. This is exactly the ethical standard of CNN. This is a perfect embodiment of their ethical and moral standards and their commitment to quality journalism. There is none. And they haven't even addressed it. So I wanted to make sure to note that, because the Cuomos have, throughout COVID, Andrew was treated like a freaking hero, like the opposite of Trump. He was, put up on TV every single fucking day to give a COVID update and treated like he was some sort of leader. He even wrote his self-aggrandizing book while he was covering up the nursing home deaths. I've been over this so many times, where he boasted. He basically had his mission accomplished moment. It's their conduct in so many different ways is so egregious, and they are still propped up by our society as elite, as worthy of being listened to, as worthy of holding power. And they both ought to be absolutely ashamed of themselves. Chris Cuomo should not be given a platform after he's been revealed to be who he is. It's very worth pointing out. This is why the mainstream press is not to be trusted. So I did want to briefly discuss the debt ceiling, which got raised to effectively December. And actually, that's one of the angles I wanted to talk about, is when you read articles, they often don't cite it as a number. They cite it as a date. And that's quite an admission in and of itself. It's an admission that the number doesn't matter at all. Well, I mean, it doesn't matter in the context that they're trying to make it appear as though it matters, right? The fear-mongering context, okay? And so when they talk about it like, yeah, the debt ceiling was raised until December. It's kind of an admission that you know what I mean? That there's nothing harmful about it. And it's obviously, I mentioned this the other week, it is totally an arbitrary creation of Congress. It is a constraint that is not at all necessary or naturally occurring or anything of the sort. It's a self-imposed constraint that Congress has arbitrarily come up with. And it's unfortunately used as a political football of sorts, and Mitch McConnell has already started to do that. He said, yeah, we're going to push it back to December, but then we're not going to do it again. So it gives leverage to various politicians in various circumstances whenever this comes up. That's really the only purpose that it serves, you guys, to have this debt ceiling. It's completely nonsensical. There's no reason to constrain yourself in your ability to do what you are supposed to do. Right? They've basically they've handcuffed their ability to do their duties, and it just makes absolutely no sense. And unfortunately, it plays into the narrative that MMT debunks, that taxes pay for things and that the government is in debt, and that by continuing to spend, we're passing it on to our children, and blah blah blah. All this complete and utter baseless nonsense. It plays right into that in terms of how it is often reported, right? I just like the sort of almost Freudian admission that we're pushing it back to December. So they're not saying we're pushing it up to whatever the new financial figure of a ceiling is, right? It's kind of an admission of how little that actually matters. And actually, if anything, even though the public has this misperception about federal spending in a way that makes them think it is irresponsible to deficit spend, it's actually quite the opposite. This constraint disallows us from responsible spending that would improve the lives of our constituents and our civilians and our society. It would make us a healthier society. If you spent in the right ways, obviously. You also can spend on the military if you want and go blow a bunch of people in abject poverty up around the world if you'd like to do it that way instead. But if you target the spending on healthcare, target the spending on housing reform and a jobs program and tuition-free college and these kinds of things, then you end up with a significantly healthier society. And that spending is responsible. And that narrative needs to be flipped, because it's currently deemed as irresponsible to deficit spend, inherently irresponsible. We know that's nonsense. And unfortunately, this debt ceiling talk kind of plays into that framing, that misframing of how federal spending actually operates. So I did want to briefly touch on the debt ceiling. We'll continue to cover that as it goes. I'm sure that both sides will try to use it as political leverage as best they can. In this case, because McConnell is in the minority, he will be the one to try to really leverage it to get concessions or to pull things out of Democratic bills or whatever it might be. And what we need to do, obviously, is just rid of the debt ceiling. It's silly to start with. It's fucking stupid. It's insane. It's to constrain your own ability to do your job is utterly insane. Makes no sense to anybody, right? But because the populace so misunderstands federal spending, I think any member of Congress that understands this is fearful that if they advocate for that, they will be viewed as irresponsible by their voters, and they'll pay for it next time at the ballot box. So we need to have a major shift in public opinion on federal spending and what public debt actually means, and what the debt ceiling is, and all of this stuff. We just need to shift our mindset on this stuff in a way that is more accurate, which MMT offers. So don't go buying into the debt ceiling nonsense that you hear in mainstream sources. Just it's arbitrary. It's a political constraint that Congress has imposed unnecessarily, and we should rid of it. Okay. But we will continue to cover what happens between now and early December. So we got a story here. The Walton family, which is the heir of Walmart, is attempting to effectively privatize water. And this is in the Wall Street Journal, so it's not exactly framed how I would frame it. But we'll dive in here. The Colorado River is in crisis. The Walton family is pushing a solution. Walmart heirs have spent heavily to promote their view that water markets are the best way to deal with a dwindling supply. The first of all, right off the bat, right? Oh, I apologize, you guys. I am not subscribed, so we cannot read this. We'll read the start. The first ever official shortage on the Colorado River has intensified a debate over how to provide water for 40 million people across the Southwest and irrigate fields of thirsty crops like wheat, cotton, and alfalfa. Few voices outside the government are more influential than that of the Walton family, billionaire heirs to the Walmart Inc. fortune, who have long advocated water markets as a key part to solving the region's woes. But some environmental groups say the Waltons drown out other non-market approaches. That's a key line right there. I apologize, you guys. I saw this article covered on another channel, and so I got the gist of it, and I brought the article up to show you guys. I'm not subscribed. I can't show you the rest. But this is obviously a concerning trend. The privatization of water is something that should be fought at virtually every cost. I also want to point out that often when we're talking about land and resources, it is indigenous communities that are the first to get screwed over. And that is often the case with water as well. But obviously, like we saw with the Flint situation, just as an example, how quick corporations are to try to take advantage of that, right? So you had like Nestle lobbying to not fix Flint, and so that they can continue to sell water bottles to Flint. You see how quickly privatization of this stuff can be detrimental to society, to communities. So it's sad to see the Waltons getting involved in this, and it also furthers kind of the narrative that we rely on these billionaires to meet our basic needs. And I think that's a really unfortunate narrative to continue to, send out there and continue to engage in. Because we certainly don't, we shouldn't. We have public institutions that, if treated properly, could and would do a much better job of supplying those basic needs and basic comforts and things that improve our quality of life. Water obviously being a bare necessity. So it's sad to see that the very corruption that creates the problems like we see in Flint, then those engaging in the corruption get to turn around and profit from the crisis by privatizing a natural resource, a very necessary natural resource, right? This is just, again, a pattern of capitalism. If you want to try to separate corruption from capitalism, good luck. This is what you get to, this kind of situation. So I have a clip now that I would like to show you guys. This is from Breaking Points. It's Julia Rock of the Daily Poster reporting on Rahm Emanuel's corruption. Rahm Emanuel, obviously given ambassador to Japan by the Biden administration, probably most known for being mayor of Chicago. He was also part of the Biden administration. Absolutely horrendous politician, in my view. He where do you even start? The police violence in Chicago is a good place to start. He covered up murders. He also contributed to gentrification. He closed a whole bunch of public schools. He has long stood on the side of neoliberalism. And now we have Julia Rock here explaining how he took money from industries that he then, while he was a member of the media after he was mayor of Chicago and after he was in the Obama administration, he was with ABC News and others, writing op-eds for the Washington Post and things. And Julia Rock explains how his narratives in those cases were influenced by the money that he was taking. It's rank corruption leading to neoliberal propaganda. So we will take a watch. This is Breaking Points talking to Julia Rock.
A piece out about former Chicago Mayor Rahm Emanuel, everybody's favorite. And you detail what you describe, and we can throw this tear sheet up on the screen, as the corporate-funded rehabilitation of Rahm Emanuel. And effectively what you do here is break down the money that he's taken from various corporate interests, how that has potentially impacted some of the commentary that he has offered in mainstream outlets, and also, by the way, the fact that none of those mainstream outlets ever disclosed that he had these very direct conflicts of interest. Just break down for us what you found.
Yeah, so after Emanuel left the mayor's office in Chicago in 2019, he got a job with ABC News as a pundit, as well as a couple of, smaller gigs writing op-eds for places like Politico, The Washington Post. He had a really short stint at The Atlantic as a contributing editor. And during that time, between 2019 and when he was nominated for the ambassadorship to Japan a couple of months ago, Emanuel just kind of trashed key progressive policies, such as Medicare for All, a Green New Deal, as well as mainstream positions within the Democratic Party, such as raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour, something that Kamala Harris and President Joe Biden both support, making college more affordable and accessible. And during that time when he was writing those op-eds and appearing on ABC News to disparage progressives, he was also making quite a bit of money working for an investment banking advisory firm called Centerview Partners. He made about $12.5 million during the 2 years between being in office and being nominated for the ambassadorship. And we looked through the deals that firm was working on during that time. And as it turns out, a lot of those deals were with major pharmaceutical companies and fossil fuel companies. So some companies would be familiar, such as Gilead, which manufactured the government-funded COVID treatment drug, as well as Pacific Gas and Electric, the utility in California. So these are companies that, are involved in lobbying against the policies that Emanuel was trashing on TV and in the pages of mainstream publications. And, like you said, it was never disclosed that he was taking in money from this firm and working on these deals while he was writing those op-eds and going on those tirades.
It is wild. I mean, $12 million, that's good work if you can get it. And what I'm really looking at here was that what you're pointing to in the disclosure is that during that exact time, whenever he was in the media, this investment deals that they were working on were directly impacted by policies he was discussing. Is that right?
Can you say more about that?
Yeah, I mean, the Gilead pharmaceutical deal that you guys point to, just explain that a little bit.
Got you. Yeah. So policies that he is on TV talking about exactly are policies that would directly affect these companies and the things they're working on. So Medicare for All is a good example. I think, not a lot of people necessarily know this, but some of the biggest lobbying money against Medicare for All has been from the pharmaceutical companies. And, the same goes for a Green New Deal, which is less of a specific policy, but kind of a collection of climate policies. And the utilities, again, have been really important kind of sources of money for lobbying efforts against climate action. So, yeah, again, these policies he's talking about would kind of directly affect these companies. It's not some tangential or down the road impact.
So obviously, Rahm Emanuel, it's not surprising that this is how he was conducting himself, but I think it's quite an insight into how the media actually operates, because I guarantee you ABC did not inform anybody that he was getting this money, nor would the Washington Post or whoever else he was working for. So it's a little insight into how guests on mainstream networks are treated. There's no transparency about where that person might make their money from, or where they may have worked previously, who they might be connected to, etc. So the incentive for that person to comment in a certain way is just totally left out of the discussion. And if someone dares to bring it up, then they're treated like they've done something taboo. How dare you reveal that this person is engaging in a conflict of interest, right? It's just kind of part of how the whole thing works. So this Rahm Emanuel gets to take money on both sides while he is pushing policy that he's getting paid to push on outlets that consider themselves media and journalistic outlets, without them revealing that he's getting that money. It's, again, I know a lot of people on the left will say, yeah, this isn't surprising. We see this all the time. Yeah, I know, but it's always worth pointing it out. Okay. It's not that I'm stunned by this. It's that we need to constantly make sure that people are aware that this is how corporate media outlets conduct themselves. This is how they operate. This is how their business model demands that they operate. And it also plays very much into political narratives and what kind of policy we get and how the duopoly is propped up and supported and maintained, and how, consent is manufactured for various horrendous policy decisions, right? So Rahm Emanuel, a great example of that. He also now gets to continue to benefit from his willingness to play ball, as he's given the ambassadorship to Japan by the Biden administration, despite pushback from not even just leftists. A lot of people pushed back on Rahm Emanuel being part of the Biden administration. He was initially up for OMB director, and that would have been a pretty big job to give to Rahm Emanuel. And there was enough pushback that Biden decided not to do that, waited a few months, and then gave him, maybe even longer than a few months, and then gave him ambassador to Japan, thinking that it had quieted down enough that he could get away with it. But unless you are a partisan down the line Democrat, you really can't stand Rahm Emanuel. There are not many people who can. So it indicates how powerful having that really is in Washington, D.C. and in the corporate press. And I want to make sure to point out that this is how the corporate media conducts itself, is engaging in exactly what they did with Rahm Emanuel. Be suspicious of the guests that they have on regularly, whose financial information they will not share with you, right? It's very likely that many of these guests are taking money from companies or industries that affect their commentary on exactly what they're brought on the network to discuss. And they will not reveal that to you. They will not be transparent about that. It's very regular thing. In fact, it happened with Heidi Heitkamp just like the other day. I don't remember which network she was on, maybe a week ago. Faiz Shakir, which is Bernie's former campaign manager from 2020, was on an interview with Heidi Heitkamp and whoever was hosting it. I think it was CNN, but I might have that wrong. It was one of the cable news outlets. And Shakir basically said, no, you're taking money from these rich assholes, and then you're doing their bidding, and it should be known that you're taking this money. Okay. And Heitkamp, I'm sorry, not Heitkamp, the host was stunned that this would be brought into the discussion at all, and almost offended, and said, well, nobody's questioning Heidi Heitkamp's, principles. Nobody's questioning that, right? Went out of her way to defend somebody who's clearly engaging in corruption and clearly doing propaganda that is rooted in that corruption. So this is how the whole game is played, and I want to make sure to continue to just remind people of that, right? Again, I know a lot of people on the left look at a story like this and go, well, yeah, duh, we all know that, right? It's still very much worth covering. Rahm Emanuel, horrible dude, engaged in corruption, engaged in propaganda, and did so with the platform of ABC and the Washington Post and others. So just continue to keep your eye out for that whenever you see sources referenced in mainstream legacy outlets, whenever you see guests on cable news or other mainstream outlets. Just be really aware that they're probably not sharing with you the true incentive for that guest in terms of what commentary they're going to produce on the program. So that is it for today, you guys. I know it's a little bit shorter show than usual. I've had a lot going on and just didn't have time to prep a longer one. I'm hoping next week we can have a couple of guests and get back to the normal swing of things. But just want to remind you, realprogressives.org. If you want to contribute to our org, our Patreon is there. You can also find all of our other content, podcasts, articles, etc. there, MMT content, on and on. So make sure not to miss anything that we're putting out, and I hope everybody has a fantastic week. I will see you all next Sunday.